I recently joined a spiritual formation cohort with something called the Renovaré Institute. And something I'll be doing a lot of over the next 2 years is reading. So I decided to treat myself to something I'm calling a cantilevered couch desk. It'll be made of maple with some walnut accents. And I'm cutting out all the pieces here. You saw me a minute ago just back up a little bit on the table saw. And that's because the blade was binding as I was ripping that strip of maple. And that sometimes happens, especially when you don't have a riving knife on your saw. And what you can do there is just back up a little bit, and the saw blade will widen the kerf, and on your next pass, you can get through cleanly, which is what happened there. So I'm cutting out all the pieces for the uprights. There's a cross brace, and there's some feet, and I'm going to start with the feet. I've roughed out the shape here of the first foot. There's 2 feet. And I'm cutting that out on the bandsaw, and then I'm going to sand it until I get it just the way I like it, because I'm going to use this first one as a pattern for the second one. So round off the toe of the foot and make sure the shape is right, and then trace it onto the other blank. Cut out the other blank on the table saw. And then this nifty trick where you just attach them to each other temporarily with double-sided tape. And then I'm going to take them over to the router table, use a trim bit to make them exactly the same. Second pass just to get it nice and clean. And then this tape sticks pretty good. Took some doing to get it apart again. But then it was time to start the joinery. The joinery is going to be all different kinds of mortise and tenon joints. So I'm cutting a tenon into the foot using the table saw fence saddle jig and going nice and slow because this is a deep cut. So I'm taking material off either side to leave a tenon in the middle, and then that's actually the upright, and I'm cutting the mortise into that, which is just a groove in the center. And it's just a bunch of fiddly work moving the table saw fence with the saddle jig on it back and forth. So you get the cut at the right width. You'll be able to see the groove here in a minute. One more pass. Going nice and slow because it's a deep cut. There's the groove you can see on the lower right. I'm going to drill a couple holes for the dowels. And then I'll test fit everything. There's one foot and the other foot. That was a nice tight fit. Go. Time to glue it up. Make sure everything's well coated. Slide it around in there, get all the glue everywhere. And here's the fun part. Just going to tap that in through a bench dog hole there. Second dowel. And as soon as you do it, the joint is nice and tight. I love it. Here's the other side. Same process. Get the glue all evenly covered. A couple of dowels going in. Clean it up. And the feet are now joined. That playing card there is keeping the saw just off the wood so the teeth don't scar the grain. They make a saw that you can use that where the teeth are not offset so that it doesn't leave any saw marks, but I don't have one of those. I use an index card to keep the saw just off the surface. Some sanding, some scraping, some sanding, just to get things just the way I want them. And now we're cutting the mortise for the cross piece, and you can see that block that I'm using to guide the chisel has a 5-degree mark on it. The mortise is open at the outer end, is tapered outward toward the edge at 5 degrees, and I'll explain why in a minute. There's my marking gauge, marking for the tenon, and I forgot to film the cutting of the tenon, but I just did that on my table saw sled. And there's the dry fit, marking the pieces A and B, so I put it together correctly. Then I took a little coffee break. Now it's time to cut the pieces that are going to become the top of the table. So back to the maple blank, cut the pieces, and then take off the saw marks on the jointer. And then I'm going to cut those pieces to length. The tabletop pieces are going to be joined by a floating tenon. So I'm going to cut grooves to match up all the tabletop pieces. And then I'm separately, out of walnut, going to cut the tennons. There's the groove there, you can see it. And the tennons, again, cut out of walnut, and they're going to fit in and be sort of floating until the glue obviously is going to attach them all. So all those different grooves, and here's cutting the walnut to the right size. Be real careful about that pass. Then I'm going to carefully cut it to length and glue it up. So there's the idea. It sits in there like a little biscuit. You can see they're going in different directions, so front to back on the back pieces and left to right on the front pieces. That was by choice. Making sure it's square here, so measure corner to corner. Measurements aren't quite the same, so a little shove in that direction. And that takes care of it. And then a little cleanup, and I'm going to put one more clamp across the front to tighten up those biscuits going left to right. And here's the leg. I'm using a dado blade to cut the mortise out there. And then this was tricky, so I'm backing the top piece onto the dado blade. I've got a mark there on the fence where it needs to stop to begin cutting out the mortise for the floating tenon there. And that's a tricky operation. Now you got to square off that cut where it was round, so this took a while. A couple different chisels. Get in there and just square it off, keep test fitting the tenons. And there's the square cut on one side, and on the other side all cleaned out. And now it's time for assembly. So here's a couple of different things going on. I'm going to drill the holes here for where the wedges are going to go in the cross brace wedged mortise and tenon. So little holes there. And then take it to the table saw to cut the slits there for the wedges. Then it's over to the router table, and this is fun because we're in the final stages here and starting to see what the piece is going to look like. Rounding off all the edges on the feet and the upright. And I left the biscuit in there just so that the bearing wouldn't fall into that gap and create a gouge. It's just friction fit in there right now. Blow off the chips. Continue with the rounding over. There's the top piece rounding over the surfaces that my hands will actually touch while I'm using it. There's the cross piece with the wedged tenons. And here we go with the final assembly. So the wedged mortise and tenon joints are going to go first. And remember, the mortises, the slots on the outer edge, are tapered. They open up at 5 degrees on the top and the bottom. So the beautiful thing about that is as you tap the wedges in, it pulls the joint tighter and tighter. So here's what it's starting to look like. Here's walnut wedge number 1 going in, and walnut wedge number 2. I'm going to tap them in. And then you'll see as they go in, the whole thing just starts to have a kind of structural rigidity that's really pleasing. Clean it up a little bit. Here's what that looks like at that stage. And this is the top of the leg. I'm drilling dowel holes there for the joint. You can't see the rest of the leg assembly, but it's all attached at this point. And I'm going to stick the walnut piece in there. This would be a floating tenon, but I'm going to dowel it on both sides because this is the one joint that holds the top of the desk onto the legs. So I want to make sure that's nice and strong. Here's the dowel holes that are going to receive it on the other end. I use that wood block as a guide for the bit. I'm going to cut those dowels off. That little piece of tenon with the wedges in it. I'm going to cut that off again using the index card, the playing card, pardon me, to keep the saw from scratching the wood grain. And here's the final assembly. Top going on, make sure we got enough glue on there. Begin to fit it together and to move it around to get it in the best position to tighten it up. But again, once the dowels went in here, the whole thing just became like a nice tight fit. Just gonna make sure the tenons are in there nice and tight. There goes dowel number 1 and dowel number 2. Boom. I didn't film putting finish on, but I put 3 coats of water-based poly on there. Here's some close-ups of the joinery with the finish on there. And I'm quite pleased with how this turned out. I'm building a temporary top because eventually this piece is going to have a chessboard for a top. But here it is, sitting in the space where I'll be using it. And I'm really pleased with the result. Thanks so much for watching.